Gabe Perreault is free to sign his entry-level contract, but we are discussing why the Rangers must be patient and must wait until next season for Perot to make his debut.
You're Locked on the New York Rangers, your daily podcast on the New York Rangers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, Blue Shirts fans, to episode number 1279 of the Locked On New York Rangers podcast. I'm your host, Jon Chik. Just want to thank you guys, as always, for making Locked On New York Rangers your first listen every day. We are free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. And today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNHL for $20 off of your first purchase. And we are, of course, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So some exciting news for Ranger fans in a season where that's kind of been few and far between. The fact that Gabe Perreault has concluded his sophomore season with Boston College. The reason for this is that Boston College lost in the quarterfinals of the NCAA college hockey tournament. The Frozen Four, Denver won that game 3-1, eliminated Perot, eliminated Boston College, eliminated other Ranger prospect Drew Fortescue while we're at it, and thus Perot is now eligible to sign his ELC with the New York Rangers. But we're going to basically spend the entirety of today's show talking about Gabe Perreault and why I don't think the time is now for the Rangers to rush him into action. Because technically, in theory, I really doubt this will happen, but technically, yes, Gabe Perreault could sign his ELC, and the Rangers could have him out there on Wednesday night against the Minnesota Wild. There's nothing stopping that from happening, but I think the Rangers need to exercise some patience here, something which they have not done with other prospects in the past. And let me just preface everything here by saying that we don't know for sure that that's what Perot is looking to do. He hasn't really said one way or the other. It's possible he could return to college for his junior year, play another year with BC. But the general thought here is that he's looking to, go pro, sign his ELC. And really, when you look at what he's done in 2 years at Boston College, I mean, he's basically done everything that there is to do. He's grown in a lot of different ways as a player, absolutely lit up the score sheet. And, the general consensus is that he will be looking to turn pro. But something else I got to mention here, if this whole scenario, the idea of Perot signing his ELC at the end of a Rangers season and then jumping right on to the NHL roster with the Rangers, if that all sounds somewhat familiar, if some of you are maybe experiencing some deja vu out there, it's because about 1 million years ago, we all lived through this exact same scenario when it came to Chris Kreider. For those of you that have been a Ranger fan that long, and in some cases quite a bit longer than that, you probably remember this. Basically what happened was Kreider was playing with Boston College back then, and he won the national championship with his team in 2012, and then literally like a day or two later, he's on the ice for the Rangers in Game 2 of a playoff series against the Ottawa Senators. The Rangers just, had him sign his ELC and threw him right out there, and away we went. And all these years later, obviously, Kreider is still here. I'm going to compare the Perot situation now to the Kreider situation back then. First of all, let me just say, it was true of Kreider back then, and it's true of Gabe Perreault now. The biggest drawback, or at least one of the biggest drawbacks to Perot signing his ELC now, is that it would result in burning a year of his 3-year entry-level contract. If he signs now, that counts as the first year. And what that would do is it would move everything up a year. The year that he becomes an RFA for the first time, that would move ahead 1 year. That would come 1 year sooner. Same thing for the first time he's arbitration eligible. Same thing for the first year that he's an unrestricted free agent. Everything would happen 1 year sooner than it otherwise would. And as far as Kreider goes, you might wonder, why would they do that with Kreider? Why would they have him sign his ELC at the end of a Rangers season? And in fact, they were actually in the playoffs that year. And you wouldn't do the same thing for Gabe Perreault. Couple of reasons, but I think the biggest reason is look at where the Rangers were in 2012 and look at where this team is right now. Think back to 2012. The Rangers were in the playoffs. They had the best record in the Eastern Conference, and they felt that they could win the Stanley Cup that year. And it's easy to roll your eyes at that now and say, the Rangers never win the Stanley Cup. What are you talking about? Bottom line, they were a really good team that year. They did at least make it to the conference finals. And by signing Kreider, having him sign his ELC, Kreider was able to jump right onto that playoff roster. and give this team a spark, give this team a boost. He was a big part of that playoff run, basically just hit the ground running. There were guys on this team like Ryan Callahan back then who could keep Chris Kreider honest, maybe convince him to finish a check or like back check every once in a while or put in some general effort. But you get the idea. Kreider hit the ground running, did a great job that season, and did help the Rangers. Now, after that, he ended up spending some time in the AHL, but for the time being, that was the right move because Kreider, they felt, could help them right away, and he did help them right away. Obviously, they didn't get the Stanley Cup, but the team was in a much different situation then than they are now. Right now, this team is not worth burning one of Gabe Perreault's ELC years. It's just not worth it. I mean, you guys, I don't have to go through everything that the Rangers have done wrong. We've basically been doing that for months and months and months at this point. We're 74 games into the season. You guys know, if you've watched this team, you know all the issues they have. You know all their shortcomings. We don't have to go through it right now. But the bottom line is they are at best a fringe playoff team. And that's probably being pretty generous. So the idea of wasting one of Gabe Perreault's ELC years on this particular squad, I'm not about that. Maybe some of you feel differently, but for me, I'd rather them wait until next year, wait until the fall. Just think that would make more sense. I'll acknowledge that it's tempting. I mean, we're talking about a guy here that absolutely scorched college hockey. I mean, he's just been on a rampage the last 2 seasons. His 2 seasons at BC combined, Perot has played in 73 games. He's got 35 goals, 73 assists. So 108 points in 73 games. He's actually been an assist per game player in college. Forget about point per game. He's been an assist per game player in college. He's also a plus 52 in his 2 years combined. And while we're talking about his stats and the way he's performed, prior to turning pro, we might as well also mention his 2 runs in the World Juniors representing Team USA. 14 games in 2 different runs in that tournament, 6 goals, 14 assists, plus 14, and 2 gold medals to boot. So he's obviously done very well every single place that he's played. The Rangers, honestly, probably never should have been able to get him when they did. They got him at number 23. He went, a lot later than any mock draft that I saw had him going. So obviously the Rangers have a good one here, and I just don't think you want to mess things up. I don't think, first and foremost, that you want to burn one of his ELC years. We just covered that. We're going to get into some other reasons why I think it's best for the Rangers to remain patient and not have him, go pro, not have him sign his ELC until next season, next fall to be exact, when we won't have to burn one of his ELCs. But there are other reasons as well. To begin with, and we're going to get to this in just a second, we're going to compare the Perot situation to some other Ranger young players that skipped the AHL entirely and talk about why I think it makes sense for Perot to go to the AHL before the NHL, at least for a handful of games. And also, I want to keep Gabe Perreault far, far away from this Ranger locker room and whatever in the world has happened to it this season and whatever continues to go on, on a day-by-day basis here, because the Ranger locker room does not feel like a very healthy place right now. So I want to keep him away from that too. I'm going to explain all those reasons in greater detail in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Monarch Money. Ever check your bank account and wonder, where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it is very easy to lose track. That's where Monarch Money comes in, your personal CFO, giving you full visibility and control over your finances. Monarch Money is not just a budgeting app. It is a complete financial command center. You can track all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place, so you stop just managing your money and start building wealth. You've got all-in-one convenience. Instead of juggling multiple apps, you can use Monarch to check your finances, track spending, and even plan long-term goals. Easy collaboration. Managing money with your partners is smoother than ever. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONNHL at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONNHL for half off of your first year. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers. A huge shout out to the everydayers. As always, thank you guys so much for supporting this podcast, sticking with this podcast through what has obviously been a very challenging season of New York Ranger hockey. For the everydayers, in our next episode, we're going to do what we were originally going to do today, but I figured it was a good time to talk about Gabe Perreault, given that, his team was knocked out of the tournament. In our next episode, what we will be doing finally is talking about Keandre Miller, talking about some of the comments that he made in a recent Vince Mercogliano article, and talking about what might be his long-term future with the Rangers, if any. So definitely looking forward to that episode. We'll do that in the next one. But for right now, let's go ahead, keep our attention on Gabe Perreault. We just talked about why, I feel like it's not worth burning one of the years of his ELC, even if that's what Perot and his camp might be looking to do at this point. I don't think the Rangers should do it. What I would like to see is Gabe Perreault, is another reason here, play some games with the Hartford Wolf Pack. I don't want him skipping the AHL entirely. You got to keep in mind, this is somebody that's still 19 years old. He'll turn 20 in May. So if he was to debut now in the NHL, he'd be only 19 years old. Again, he'll be turning 20 in the spring. But to me, the AHL, the Hartford Wolf Pack, that is the next logical step in his development. It's one thing when you draft a player, first overall, second overall, third overall, and they end up skipping the AHL entirely. In that situation, a lot of times it can make sense because, hey, this is a superstar player and he's ready to go and he doesn't need any AHL tune-up. Even then, though, I don't think it's a terrible idea to get at least some games in the AHL, just as a natural bridge to the NHL. But when you draft somebody that high, you can at least understand them skipping the AHL. Look, Perot, great player, tons of upside, all kinds of natural ability, just a phenomenal hockey player. But he was drafted number 23. There are not too many players that go that late and skip the AHL entirely, and I just don't think that Gabe Perreault should be an exception to that rule. So, bottom line, let him go to the Wolfpack first, start him there next year, get his first taste of pro hockey action. There's less attention, there's less eyes on the Wolfpack than on the Rangers, obviously. Let him hopefully hit the ground running, put him in a prominent role, give him big time on the ice every single night. We're talking like 20 minutes. Let him do his thing, top power play unit, all that good stuff, and hopefully just tear it up. And I alluded to this just a minute or two ago, but one of the biggest reasons why I'm so pro AHL when it comes to Gabe Perreault here is because of what we've seen recently with the Rangers and their young prospects and rushing them to the NHL. And I think the two most obvious examples of this are Kaapo Kakko and Alexis Lafreniere, taken number 2 overall and taken number 1 overall in back-to-back years, respectively. We'll start with Kakko. Kakko was 18 years old when he debuted for the New York Rangers. Never once played an AHL game. There were flashes here and there with Kakko, as you guys know, just enough to give you hope that it might work out here. We had the kid line, that nice playoff run that they had during Gerard Gallant's first year. But bottom line, I don't think you can really look at Kakko's tenure as a New York Ranger and come to the conclusion that it was anything other than a disappointment. He did some good things for sure, but I think the Rangers, when you take this guy number 2 overall, you're certainly expecting more than what the Rangers got from him. And what makes it even stranger to me is that the Rangers were still rebuilding at the time. So Kakko skipping the AHL, it didn't really need to happen. It's not like they were in a Stanley Cup window that was, very quickly closing and they needed to rush this guy along and, hey, this is our last shot. Let's do this thing. No, they were right in the middle of a rebuild. They had a ridiculously young roster. Obviously, Kakko was part of that. But I don't see any real reason why Kakko couldn't have played at least a handful of games in the AHL. Once again, is that natural bridge from the wherever you're playing before pro hockey and the NHL. I just think they kind of missed the boat there. And obviously things didn't work out for Kakko. Not saying that him skipping the AHL was the only reason, but I can very easily believe that it was one of the reasons. Then you've got Alexis Lafreniere. 19 years old when he debuted. He would have been 18, but that was the year where, COVID, or one of the years where COVID basically wreaked havoc. The NHL season that year didn't start until January. Lafreniere went basically an entire calendar year without playing in a single hockey game. Once again, mostly due to COVID. There was no preseason that year. There wasn't much of a training camp either for the Rangers. So Lafreniere missed out on a lot and obviously started very slowly as a 19-year-old rookie. And honestly, started most of his NHL career slowly. It wasn't until last year where he finally broke out. And now this year, I don't know what's gone on ever since he's signed that new contract. But again, did the Rangers make a mistake by not having Lafreniere start in the AHL? You could certainly make that case. Because again, that season, the Rangers were still in the middle of their rebuild. So there was no real reason to rush him along that quickly. Again, same thing with Kakko. It's not like there was a championship window that was, about to slam shut on this team and they needed to get Lafreniere up there as quickly as possible. That certainly wasn't the case. And the Wolfpack, that was a really weird year for them. They only ended up playing 24 games, again, largely due to COVID. And that was the year that they only had 2 opponents the entire season. It was Providence and Bridgeport, because certain AHL teams played that year and other ones didn't. But the Pack played, and again, it was only 24 games, but that's a nice chunk of games that Alexis Lafreniere could have played in the AHL that year. And if he had lit it up, then maybe you call him up a little bit later in the season. And again, for Lafreniere, for all the struggles that he's had, does this all come down to the fact that he didn't play in the AHL? Probably not. But looking back now, it's hard to kind of see where things are now and not wish that, maybe he should have been in the AHL for at least a handful of games, half a season, maybe even an entire season. Probably would have been better for Alexis Lafreniere, probably would have been better for the New York Rangers. And a less obvious player that I think you could probably throw in there is K'Andre Miller. And with him, it's a little bit different, because with Miller, I feel like his best hockey, no joke, was like in his first 2 seasons. And since then, he has plateaued at best. And like a lot of Rangers on this team, to me, this is K'Andre Miller's worst season in the NHL. But he, too, skipped the AHL entirely. He was at Wisconsin, and then the next thing you know, he's making his debut. I think he was 20 years old, was K'Andre Miller with the Rangers. Never got a single game in the AHL. It didn't seem to matter initially. I think a lot of us were really impressed by what K'Andre Miller was doing early in his NHL career. But I don't know. Maybe there were some aspects to his game that could have used some honing in the NHL. Bottom line, all this is to say that the Rangers have not had a lot of success recently when it comes to rushing their prospects to the NHL. So with that in mind, with hindsight being what it is, let's go ahead and not make the same mistake with Gabe Perreault, because I really do think that even 20, 25, 30 games, somewhere in that ballpark for Perreault with the Wolfpack, that can make a really big difference for him. We'll see how it goes. And same deal with Perot as any of those other players that I just mentioned. If he goes to the Wolfpack and he absolutely just sets the league on fire and he's like up there near the top of the AHL in points and goals, and he's working on other aspects of his game, maybe he's working on his physicality a little bit, continuing to bulk up a little bit as he's been doing, throughout his tenure at BC. If it gets to that point and the Rangers next season are in a spot where, they need a spark, then by all means call him up. There's no reason you can't do it in the middle of a season. But for me, I'm not negotiating this. Obviously, they haven't asked for my opinion, the Rangers. But the bottom line, if I'm in control of this, he must play in the AHL next season. There's no skipping the Hartford Wolf Pack for Gabe Perreault. Put him in a prominent role there and let him do his thing. Let him build his confidence. And then when the call is made, I mean, look, if he's playing for the Wolf Pack next season and he's lighting it up and producing all these points and doing all these great things, we're going to just get that much more excited as a fan base, because I know there's certain fans that are going to want to see him right away and just throw him out there and let's go. But the bottom line is just let the anticipation build, because if he goes to the Wolfpack and does very well, we're all going to know it's only a matter of time. And we've got this bona fide potential superstar in the making that's honing his craft with the Wolfpack, and he'll get to the Rangers in due time. And that'll obviously be a lot of fun then whenever he does make his debut with the New York Rangers. Bottom line, though, I will be shocked if we do not see Gabe Perreault on the Rangers at some point next season. Like I said, I don't want him skipping the AHL, not at all. But once he's in the AHL, once he's comfortable, once he starts producing, and once the Rangers have a role for him, they have to have a role for him, then they call him up, and then we all get excited, and we have some fun, and we see Gabe Perreault make his debut with the Rangers. I'm very curious to see if it'll be one of those cup of coffee deals. Will Cooley, his first call-up for the Rangers, he was there for 4 games. And then Brent Hoffman last year, his first call-up, he was only there for 3 games. Might be something similar with Perot, but depending on how he does in the AHL, if the Rangers do indeed start him there next season, it's possible he gets called up and he just stays, and that's it. And Gabe Perreault's a Ranger and an AHLer for, the rest of his career. Hopefully a very long and successful career with the New York Rangers. There's always that little hesitance, though, right, when it comes to Ranger prospects, because we know that their recent track record is not good. Let's just hope that that things work out for Gabe Perreault. But I think step one of doing that is starting him next season and starting him with the Hartford Wolf Pack. So hopefully that's what they do. We shall see. Or, if you feel differently, let me know. If you think he's ready for NHL action, certainly let me know there. I know there's going to be some differing opinions when it comes to a player like Gabe Perreault. But bottom line, in just a second, we're going to keep everything rolling. going to go ahead and talk about a couple more reasons why I don't think that Gabe Perreault should be in the NHL this year and why I think, obviously he should start in the AHL next season. The reasons basically are Peter Laviolette and the fact that it seems like he's getting toward the end of his tenure as a head coach of the New York Rangers. And we're also going to talk about the players on the Rangers and why this locker room probably is not the best place for Gabe Perreault right now. We will get to that in just a second. All right, we just want to take a minute to let everybody know that today's episode of Locked On New York Rangers is brought to you by Wonderful Pistachios. Looking for a snack that is both delicious and nutritious? Crack into a good source of protein with Wonderful Pistachios. Wonderful Pistachios is one of the highest protein nuts. Each 1 ounce serving has 6 grams of protein, giving you over 10% of your daily value. Plus, they're packed with fiber and better for you unsaturated fats to help keep you feeling fuller longer. Personally, I love the no shells variety. It's the perfect grab and go snack for busy days. The satisfying crack of opening each shell, it is like snack meditation. Whether you're running between meetings or dropping off the kids, Wonderful Pistachios are the snack that works just as hard as you do. Get snacking and get cracking with the snack that packs a protein punch. Visit wonderfulpistachios.com to learn more. All right, let's go ahead and keep everything rolling here on Locked On New York Rangers to wrap up this Gabe Perreault-centric episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's go ahead and talk about, first of all, we'll get to Laviolette in just a second. Let's actually start with the New York Ranger locker room. Does anybody feel like the Ranger locker room is a healthy place right now? Does anybody feel like there are positive vibes and, guys stepping up in leadership roles right now? You've watched this team for 74 games this season, just like I have. I don't think that's a place right now for Gabe Perreault. I don't think that's a place right now for any rookie who's 19, 20, 21 years old to make his NHL debut. It just hasn't been good. You know what would happen if Gabe Perreault was assigned as ELC, and let's say he did that and he plays these final 8 games here. You know who would be the player in the locker room to take him under his wing and kind of show him the ropes a little bit and make him feel welcome and make him feel wanted there? It would be Johnny Brodzinski. The proof is in the pudding. We've seen that. We've seen multiple Ranger players rave about Brodzinski's leadership and how much he's taken care of them and made sure that they're all right. When the team was in Minnesota to play the Wild not too long ago, Brodzinski, I don't know if he lives there now or he's from there, but he had everybody, all the young guys over to his house. Him and his wife were cooking them dinner. Brodzinski would be the guy to do it. And some of the veterans, it just seems like, based on some of these stories that we hear, just can't be bothered with any of that. So the bottom line, I'm not putting Perreault anywhere near the Ranger locker room right now due to basically the way this team has behaved the entire season, the way these players have acted the entire season. And that also brings us to Peter Laviolette. And this goes back to something that we've talked about on here. I think at this point, Laviolette pretty much knows that he's a dead man walking and that there's very little chance that he's going to be back next season, barring something completely unexpected. But, right now, I think a lot of us have really questioned some of the lineup decisions that Peter Laviolette has made. We've questioned some of the time on the ice and the usage of these guys at different situations in the game. Do you really think that if Perreault debuts on Wednesday and there's 8 games left, that any of that is going to change with Peter Laviolette just because Gabe Perreault is here now? Do you think Peter Laviolette is going to care at all about making sure Perreault gets a good spot in the lineup, gets a good amount of time on the ice, and develops for next season? I really doubt it because Laviolette's not going to be a part of this team next season. Again, barring something completely unexpected. You got to think they're going to go in a different direction when the season ends. Laviolette, like a lot of coaches, tends to defer to the veterans. And I don't care how good Perreault was in college. I don't care how much upside there is. I don't care where the Rangers drafted him. He's not going to change his mind now for this one player. It's just not going to happen. And call me crazy, but I just do not think that it's worth having Perreault sign his ELC, thus burning a year of said ELC, for him to go out there for 8 games with the Rangers and play 6 minutes a night with, I don't know, Nicholas Aube-Kubel and Juuso Parssinen. Does that really sound like it's worth it? Because that's how they would use him. That's how they would use him. They're not going to put him on the top power play. They're not going to put him on any power play. The third period will come around. They'll have him glued to the bench. And I just am not interested in seeing one of the best college hockey players over the last 2 years get called up to the Rangers and be used like that, potentially thus destroying his confidence in the process. That would not be good. And You might hear that and kind of think about, guys like Brian Offman and guys like Brett Berard and their usage this year. And I think their usage has left something to be desired. I do like the fact that recently Offman is at least getting some run with Trocheck and Panarin. I know the points haven't been there, but his willingness to go to the dirty parts of the rink, get to the front of the net, that has not gone unnoticed. And I think he's been close to scoring a couple of times recently as well. So that's at least been a little bit better from Laviolette as far as how he's using Offman. But for the most part, Offman and Berard don't get a lot of ice time. They mostly play on the fourth line. And I don't think that's the best thing for the development. But for the two of them, you can at least live with it because they both play a physical, gritty style, which does translate, pretty well to the fourth line. I don't think that's the best use of your prospects, like I said, to throw them out there on the fourth line. But at least there's a skill set where, okay, you can keep them on the fourth line for a little while and they work their way up in due time. That's not Gabe Perreault. Gabe Perreault isn't known for his physicality. He's not known for necessarily going to the dirty parts of the rink. Although a recent article from Vince Mercogliano about Gabe Perreault does have some quotes from Perreault's coaches at BC, and it does sound like he has worked on those parts of his game. But be that as it may, I have zero interest of seeing Gabe Perreault play a single shift on the fourth line for his entire career. He just doesn't have the skill set for it. He has the skill set to be hopefully a top sixer, but at the very least, a top niner. I mean, I think that's reasonable for your, first round pick, the guy that's the biggest prospect in your organization. And I've kind of hinted at this a couple of times through this episode. Might as well acknowledge it here. The biggest knock on Perreault seems to be his lack of size. He is listed at 5'11", 178 pounds. And really, that might explain why he fell as far as he did in the NHL draft, all the way down to number 23 for the Rangers to grab him. Because every mock draft that I saw had this guy going somewhere around 8, 10, 12, 14, somewhere in that general area. I don't remember a single mock draft, at least the ones that I looked at, that had him going as late as number 23. I think I even did an episode because we were previewing the draft and, who might the Rangers take at number 23. And I do remember talking about him, but even when I talked about him, I said, look, I really don't expect him to be there, but if he is, he'd be a great pick for the Rangers, and this is why, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And to my surprise, he indeed was there for the Rangers, and they indeed did pounce on him. But the bottom line, that's kind of the knock on him as far as, the lack of size. But to me, it's not that much of a deterrent. I mean, if that's the worst thing you can say about somebody's game is that he's not there physically yet at the age of 19, then that's probably a good thing. The bottom line, here's my requirements that I have for the Rangers as far as what I want the situation to be like whenever Gabe Perreault does make his debut for the Rangers. I'm hoping that's not on Wednesday. I'm hoping that's not for the rest of this season. And I'm hoping it's not until next season after he spends a bare minimum of 20 games with the Hartford Wolf Pack. But whenever Perreault does debut for the Rangers, whenever that might happen, these are my requirements. I'm just going to lay them all out for you. First of all, no fourth line ever. Not a single game, not a single shift. If you call up Gabe Perreault, if you want him on your roster, he doesn't belong anywhere near the fourth line. If that's how you're going to use him, then don't bother. Keep him in the AHL and let him continue to develop. Another requirement I have, none of this 6 or 7 minutes a night BS that we see with other Ranger prospects. Guys like Brian Offman, guys like Brett Berard. If that's all you're going to play them, then don't bother having them on the Ranger roster. Have them with Hartford. No being glued to the bench in the third period. We see this every now and then. Players that play well for the Rangers all of a sudden find themselves stuck on the bench for sometimes the entire third period. We saw that with Matt Rempe. Some other players too. With Rempe, though, I mean, there's just certain situations where they're just not going to put him on the ice. And until he got injured, or right before he got injured, it did feel like Laviolette and the coaching staff were becoming a little bit more comfortable with putting Rempe on the ice in the third period, even in close games. But none of that with Gabe Perreault. He's too good for you to damage his confidence and have him glued to the bench for an entire third period just because the Rangers are in a close game. If he's here, he plays. That's the bottom line. And I don't want to see any healthy scratchings with Gabe Perreault either. I'm not interested in seeing Gabe Perreault watching the game from the press box so that Arthur Kaliev, can play 6 minutes a night. I'm not interested in that in the slightest. So here's everything, though. This is my absolute bare minimum for the Rangers, for Gabe Perreault, whenever he does get the call to the team, whenever he does make his Ranger debut. I want him to at least be on the third line. That's a pretty modest request. I know some people are going to hear that and want him in the top 6 right away. I wouldn't even necessarily argue that, especially when you see how some of the Ranger top 6 forwards have played this season, but I'm reasonable. I'll be generous here. He's got to at least be on the third line for him to make his Ranger debut. On top of that, bare minimum of 15 minutes per night. That's not unreasonable either. There are 60 minutes in a hockey game. There are 4 lines. If you're playing 15 minutes a night, that's literally like the most average amount of ice time that you can have because there's 4 lines split among 60 minutes, 15 minutes, bare minimum for Gabe Perreault. Again, I'm being as reasonable as I can possibly be about this. Also, a spot on the second power play unit at a bare minimum. The power play's been awful this year. What are they, 2 for their last 35 now? So he's got to be there. There's 10 spots on the power play. Typically, the Rangers only use 1 defenseman on the top power play unit and only 1 defenseman on the second power play unit. So that leaves 8 spots for a forward. He's got to be in that top 8. He's got to at least be on the second power play unit. If you can't commit to that, then don't bother calling him up. And also, a plan to play him at all times. I kind of hinted at this just a second ago, too. He's got to play on the ice in the first period, the second period, the third period. You can't scale back or completely eliminate his ice time in the third period just because you're in a close game. And again, I will be reasonable here. If you feel like Perot is not among your better defensive forwards and there's like 5 minutes left and you're up by a goal, okay, in that situation, you can sit Perot down. But none of this BS where he's on the bench for the entire third period. I don't want to see any of that either, especially not for a player as good as Gabe Perreault. I think that's pretty much everything. Maybe some of you have some requirements too, but that's how I'm laying it out for the New York Rangers. All these things, all these boxes have to be checked for Gabe Perreault to be on the New York Ranger roster. No healthy scratchings and fourth line appearances and all this other nonsense that we see, with the other prospects. So, yeah, that's kind of where things stand as far as whether he signs or not. I would imagine, again, that him and his camp would definitely love for him to sign sooner rather than later. But for me, for all the reasons I basically just laid out, the fact that, it would start his ELC a year early. Don't like that. I don't like the fact that he would skip the AHL. I mean, you could have him debut this year and then put him in the AHL next season. You could always do that, but you still would burn the year of the ELC. And again, maybe honestly the biggest reason. I had this as the third reason. It might be the biggest reason. Keep him away from what appears to be an absolutely poison New York Ranger locker room, at least for this year. I mean, sooner or later, he's going to have to debut and he's going to have to step in there. But at least you can come back fresh next season. The guys that are back next year, hopefully they have a fresh mindset and they're ready to just forget about this awful season that they've had. Maybe certain players are no longer here, and maybe that would be a good thing for Gabe Perreault and the New York Rangers as a whole. But we can call it there. If you guys would like to get in touch with this podcast, please send an email to lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Once again, that is lockedonnyrangers@gmail.com. Definitely give us a follow on Twitter as well, @jchik17. Once again, @jchik17. And definitely subscribe to Locked On New York Rangers YouTube channel. Thanks again, guys. I will see you next time.